Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Fletcher. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Climate Solutions for West Virginia event, part of a global dialogue on green recovery, climate solutions, and just transition. I am pleased to serve as the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences at West Virginia University, which is hosting this event. I first want to give just a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get started. You'll notice that the chat function is not turned on for this Zoom webinar. However, we do have the Q&A function turned on, and we ask and encourage you to ask any questions that you may have in there at any point during the presentations. When we get to the Q&A portion, we will start answering as many as we can. We also received a few questions in advance, which we will be happy to take on as the presentation continues. And now, without much further ado, I'd like to get us started since we have a lot of great presenters and a lot to share. So it's my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Eberly College, Gregory Dunaway.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Dunaway, and as Laura said, I serve as the Dean of the Eberly College of Arts and Sciences. And it's certainly my pleasure to welcome you this evening to this evening's event. And thank you so much for taking time to be here. Understanding the dimensions of global climate change and how best to respond to the impact on our environment and our society is arguably one of the most important issues facing humankind right now. Indeed, many believe it's the most important issue and one that poses an existential threat. Thus, I am very grateful to be part of a community which is willing to engage in discussion and action on this topic. While certainly a global issue, the potential effects of climate change can be experienced in all regions of the world, including right here in West Virginia. Tonight's event is part of a larger initiative being coordinated by the Bard Center for Environmental Policy through their Solve Climate by 2030 project. Thus, our event joins with similar events across the US and the world, with an emphasis on local impact and response. This discussion holds a special meaning, though, in a place whose economic and cultural tradition has been intertwined with fossil fuel energy sector. Thus, it's important for us to recognize that people, indeed entire communities in the state, are acutely aware and concerned about the implications of climate change and what the impact of proposed solutions may mean for their way of life and their livelihoods. Thus, it is important to hear from local voices from around the state. Our panel of speakers represent individuals who have a unique perspective on this topic, and I am certainly very grateful for their participation. I'm also grateful to Dr. Kathryn Williamson from our Department of Physics and Astronomy, as well as Dr. Duncan Lorimer, who is our Associate Dean for Research in Eberly, for their efforts in planning and coordinating tonight's event. Again, I want to welcome you, and I look forward to a lively discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Kathryn right now, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Dean Dunaway, and thank you all for being here tonight. We have a panel of 4 amazing speakers from throughout West Virginia who are working to enact climate solutions right here and right now in our communities. We've chosen these panelists to share their one big idea for tackling climate change in West Virginia in a substantive way by 2030. These big ideas are meant to be bold yet doable, and we have selected these speakers because they are doing the actions now from their communities in the most promising way for West Virginia. We have Jacob Hanna, and I'll invite him to turn his video on, from Coalfield Development on new solutions from the old troubles, how negatives create a positive for an Appalachian just transition. We have Leah Mason, a student at Marshall University, on relationship restoration, how regionalized food systems intersect climate change and food insecurity. We have Pam Nixon from West Virginia NAACP on understanding the challenges of climate change in vulnerable communities. And we have Jim Probst from West Virginia Citizens Climate Lobby on his New Day for the Coalfields. So these panelists in our presentation are just our West Virginia solutions, focusing on our state, our region, but we are not doing this alone today. We are part of over 100 dialogues happening around the world today. So We are doing this as part of an effort out of the Bard Center for Sustainable Design. And we have a message from their director to share with you before we get started with our panelists.
Sorry, everyone, just one moment. This isn't working as I anticipated it would. So I'm just going to share a different screen. One moment.
Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 US states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eben Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much-needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the 2 hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the US rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice, and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students, and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world, asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forward, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
All right, thank you for sharing that, Laura. And I am honored to introduce our first panelist to lead us off with their one big idea, Jacob Hanna. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen real quick here and get started. Okay, let me make this full here. Alrighty, so I am from Coalfield Development. I am our conservation coordinator here in Huntington, West Virginia. And let's talk a little bit about what a just transition means here in Appalachia. It's sort of a hot button topic, and it's sort of still getting its definition as we speak here of what actually is a just transition. But for us here in Central Appalachia, the best way to describe it would be the first fruits of a new economy should foremost prioritize the well-being of those left behind by the last economy. So a lot of times, in the traditional transition model, you'll see a very top-down approach where the government owns the mines and the factories, et cetera, and they phase it all out. And the last people impacted by that transition are the ones at the bottom who used to operate or function within that economy. And so usually they're left behind or pushed out by a new workforce. And so what we're trying to do at Coalfield Development is flip that methodology and start with the people at the bottom first, to build the tools and the systems to create that change at the top. So it's rebuilding a just transition from the ground up with blue collar sustainability. So we are a triple bottom line organization, meaning that we consider people, planet, and profit equally in our decision making, because none of that exists in a vacuum of itself. So how can we address the issues of climate change while not leaving behind the people who helped provide the needs that we had in the previous energy economy, and how can we make all those work together for a new economy for those folks? And so that's done through our three core capacities. As a nonprofit organization, we incubate social enterprises. We're the largest solar installer in the region as one of our enterprises. We have a woodworking shop that makes furniture products out of dilapidated wood materials that we rescue. We're a t-shirt company that makes textiles out of recycled plastics. And we're a large aggregation hub as well that uses aquaponics and other sustainable procedures to help satisfy some of the needs in the region. And so those enterprises hire folks who are facing barriers to employment, whether you're a coal miner who got laid off, or you're someone who's coming out of opioid recovery, or you're just facing other challenges in the region. You're the demographic that we want to help incorporate into this organizational supply chain. And so those ingredients together help create this broader strategy for revitalizing dilapidated properties and communities and creating new strategies for those regions that would normally be just dying off in the region. So a typical work week for one of our trainees looks like this, where they spend 33 hours a week of paid on-the-job training in any of those enterprises that I mentioned before. 6 hours a week in the classroom pursuing an associate's degree or a certificate that we help provide. And then 3 hours a week of personal development, learning life skills, financial literacy, things that we all sort of take for granted that we learned at one point in life that were denied to these folks to help them have more tools in the toolbox to be able to tackle the challenges of life. And so these are some of the outdated numbers. This is a lot more than what it is now, but we've created over 200 new jobs, 40 new businesses, over 800 professional new certifications issued, 60 new degrees earned, over 195,000 square feet of space revitalized, and $16 million in new investment leveraged in the region that wouldn't have been there before. And so this is a snapshot from one of the former strip mines in the region, one of the very many in the area that used to be a moonscape, really, with no topsoil. And so this is one of our projects to start an agricultural hub on top of one of those sites that through time of composting and the agriculture and the livestock there is helping to bring back that needed topsoil layer again. And we've also used other equipment like the one you see down in the middle that's attached to a SEPI rock crusher that takes that 16 inches of top rock soil down into a permeable topsoil surface again. And so that's one of our initiatives. And then of course, as I mentioned before, we partnered with the Honnold Foundation from Alex Honnold to install the largest nonprofit solar array in West Virginia to power that hub where our trainees actually learn the solar equipment and the training itself for installations. So this is some of the snapshots from that as well. So really incorporating that people, place, and profitability as well. This is one of the buildings in a coal town not far from where I grew up that was just dilapidated, and now it has a coffee shop, apartments in the top, development authority in the offices there. And again, all this is done just through our trainees that really, as a population, have been left behind by the absence of a just transition, an unjust transition. So overall, these are two negatives that make a positive wherever we go. And how do we take this strategy of combining negatives to make positives to address this broader issue that I'm about to touch on? So this graph shows the relationship of how it's been for a very long time with the recycling economy internationally. As you can see, America and the rest of the world, really, we've been sending all of our recyclables to China. But in 2018, China passed the National Sword Act, and they said, listen, we're done taking everyone's recyclables because you're also sending us over all of your crap too that we can't recycle. And so they completely halted all of that. And so the rest of the world has felt that ripple effect of what do we do with all these materials now? And as you can guess, in areas like Appalachia, where we don't have a lot of infrastructure to tackle this, you've got mass pollution in the Ohio River next to where I live at, just constantly plastics flowing down the river. You have illegal landfills popping up left and right. And then add that on top of gaping mine lands that are unabated. It's just a recipe for disaster in our region. And if you're following the trends of landfill tonnages, you're going to guess that this isn't going to go down. We're not going to get rid of things that we throw away anytime soon. And so these are just some numbers from those towns that I mentioned before. Really big hubs in our region of West Virginia have completely, in some cases, stopped recycling altogether, have had to scale back some of their recycling initiatives. And that really harms our strongest economy of tourism. So folks coming in for the Hatfield-McCoy trail systems, if you got stuff floating down the river or litter in your streets, it's really going to damage that value of that market. So returning back to what I mentioned before, to Coalfield's model, this on your left here, this is an old dilapidated building that we're deconstructing and then upcycling in the products that you see on the right of your screen with the trainees there in the pictures. How do we take that same design thinking and apply it to this broader regional issue that Central Appalachia is facing? And so we just started looking around at any low-hanging fruits with our partnerships in the area. Marshall University, they produce a lot of food waste with their student body on campus. We produce a lot of sawdust from our wood shop. Let's combine those two together on a former strip mine and create a high grade quality compost that can be sold back into the community, that can go back to Marshall's needs. And also the byproduct can start to return an semblance of a topsoil layer to that strip mine as well. Similarly, with our other partners out in Wayne County, old textiles that would be thrown away or just mildew and just be cast outside somewhere can be shredded and upcycled to be the necessary fibers for growing mushrooms with our other partners. And so that thinking continues and continues with all these partners in the region where, listen, County A does not have $5 million to replicate what County B has. So let's get those two counties talking together. You know, you may have a supply of something and I may have a demand of something, and really all that's missing is the logistics. And so that's why you see those little green truck icons highlighted, because really this is a central nervous system of Appalachia that's connecting these dots together. to allow for that collaboration to happen. And so the primary regions of impact that you're seeing here for these collaborations are the green states. They're highlighted where we have direct partners and collaborations happening, and then the spillover effect where those other external third-party partners or communities are in those yellow counties, and we're expecting to expand up into Pennsylvania soon as well. And so really it's not really done before to see such a multi-state collaboration and coalition of enterprises. And so we've been able to use that strength in numbers to apply for these larger grants from the Appalachian Regional Commission and the United States Department of Agriculture and other funding sources. And so it's been really financially feasible for us to mobilize a lot of opportunities for a strategic plan, for collection events, et cetera. And so this is one of those collection events that I was talking about before. This is all electronics here during COVID. Folks were able to bring it by in the backs of their trunks, and we were able to unload it. And this is what the partnership looks like right now from the main primary partners. It's not just nonprofits. When you think of things that are just for the good of the region, you think, okay, it's probably nonprofits and it's probably universities. These are mom and pop businesses. These are larger corporations. These are manufacturers. These are development authorities and governments. It's every type of organization imaginable, because every organization experiences waste. It experiences the cost of waste. And so why pay shipping fees, labor hours, dumping fees, time, et cetera, all these costs associated with something that still has value in it? Let's get rid of those costs and just plug it into someone else who's actually looking for those materials and create value there, create a value chain. And so that's what's really been cultivating here with these partners. So tying it back to that blue collar sustainability, these are our trainees that are able to utilize those products then to upcycle them into new products, into new value added items. And these are just a fraction of some of those products as well. These planter pots that you see on the top left are made out of melted and upcycled plastics that would have been discarded. Cup holders there and placemats on the bottom left as well from plastics. These desks made out of rare wood materials that wouldn't be found elsewhere. Like some of them are wormy chestnut, which you just can't get a hold of anymore. And then the shirts there made out of recycled plastics into textiles. It's softer than what you'd think, being made out of plastics. I'm actually wearing one right now. And then of course on the bottom right is the compost. So this is just some of the products that didn't exist in the region that are now able to come to fruition because of these supply chains. And so continuing that mindset of how do we incorporate, the infrastructure around us. You have old abandoned factories like this one that we're upcycling to be aggregation hubs and open air markets with maker spaces. This is another abandoned strip mine that's actually in relation to West Virginia University that we're trying to get transformed into a composting center as well. And again, large organizations that are coming on board for recycling. This is 2,000 tires pulled out of the river nearby in Williamson, West Virginia, that were upcycled, and now that river is an economic driver for that community. And it really just touches all of the points that you would really want to have incorporated in a just transition for the existing economies and new economies. So I know I'm probably short on time. I won't touch on this more detailed tree here, but really it's getting to systems. How can we create systems out of these collaborations? And that's getting the attention of these larger organizations like the World Bank and the EU's platform for coal regions and transitions, where they're understanding, hey, maybe there is more than just one way than a top-down approach. We can integrate everyone to be a part of this conversation and a part of the solution. So I will stop there and actually take a breath.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was wonderful. It's clear that there's a lot to learn there. And we'll go ahead and move on to our next panelist. Leah, would you like to go ahead and share your screen?
Sure thing. Let's see. Oh, one moment. Okay. Okay, let's see. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about relationship restoration and how regionalized food systems intersect climate change and food insecurity. This is what climate change in our state looks like. In the past century, relative humidity and cloud cover have increased. So instead of drought-resistant seeds, farmers seek seeds that can withstand these conditions. These are the popular solutions that are given to farmers in our state. It's recommended that farmers alter their practices by growing more expensive crops, double cropping, and lengthening their growing seasons. And while these solutions would certainly improve the situation we find ourselves in, they don't address how we got here. And that has to do with where we place our value. So lately, I've begun to see how foundational relationship is to everything. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Whether it's a good one or a bad one, it's a relationship. I've learned a lot about this from the minds of Indigenous scholars and activists. The knowledge of how relationships are both essential and worthy of celebration is unique to these voices, not mine. So before we go any further, I'm just stressing the necessity of not just making space for these voices, but knowing their words to be the solution. And I wanted to express my gratitude. I just wanted to include this beautiful quote by Vina Ade Romero, who is Cochiti Puebloan and Kiowa Indian, and consults for First Nations Development Institute. She says, for Indigenous people, our food sources are physical manifestations of a relationship between person and earth that has developed over hundreds, if not thousands of years. So on that note, let's dive in. So walking into a grocery store, we're faced with this abundance of food. But while moving from aisle to aisle, it's easy to not think about where our food comes from and the processes it must go through to make it to the shelf. As consumers, we've come to expect the never-ending supply of food in the grocery store. This little graphic shows what really goes on with our food. It's highly simplified, but still, this isn't what we picture in the grocery store. So consider an avocado grown in California. It must be picked, stored, distributed, processed, moved, stored again, packaged, marketed, and chosen by you before it ends up on your plate and its pit in your trash, unless you compost it or regrow it. So Dr. Molly Brown at UND said climate change affects food security in two ways: reducing the amount of food available, which increases prices, and by affecting each of the food system's elements, which are very vulnerable to climate. Yet what Dr. Brown did not include was the ways that the global food system and each of its elements contribute to climate change as well. In order to meet the needs of the industrial food system, these are necessary practices for large-scale commercial farms. And on so great a scale, they contribute to climate change by increasing greenhouse gas emissions, decreasing cultivar biodiversity, and harming the soil. So shifting our focus to food insecurity in our state, this is the number of people in West Virginia who are food insecure. And this is the sum that food insecure individuals reported needing to be able to purchase just enough food to feed their household. And in June 2020, grocery prices rose 5.6% in comparison to the previous year. One author noted that COVID-19 has laid bare the vulnerabilities of America's food supply chain. In other words, the pandemic has exposed the unsustainable nature of our food system. And this certainly leads to health disparities and affects marginalized communities at a greater rate due to the historically inequitable structure of the system. And I believe Pam is going to be discussing those ideas further. So let's talk soil. We're now going to delve into what the farming practices in our food system reveal about our relationship to soil. So these ideas were posed by the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. The author of this article was saying that farm policies that reward the overproduction of vast monocultures and don't require basic conservation practices negatively impact the environment. And just to be clear, I'm not trying to blame any farmers or food operations or grocery stores or consumers, but I'm saying that all of these entities have a hand in negatively impacting the environment. And these policies incentivize the food system to continue this way. So in order to address this, our values must be shifted. So thinking about our ever-stretching food system, we're looking for continual expansion. Yet the solution to climate change and food insecurity is not making more food, and it's not expanding the system either. When large-scale farming practices force production, soil health is negatively impacted. About 40% of food gets wasted, climate change continues, and the demand for genetically modified seeds, harmful fertilizers, and pesticides increases. And with these, so do greenhouse gas emissions. This decreases the value of heirloom seeds and biodiversity, worsening soil health. But instead of changing the structure to allow for healing to happen, seeds and soil are the entities that this system is forcing to change. This is how the industrial food system perpetuates poor environmental health. We treat the soil like it was made for us to continually extract from and alter for our sake. But what if we saw the soil as something that requires relationship? I know I'm venturing into a space that sounds pretty idealistic and maybe even a little naive, but hear me out. So yes, absolutely, these issues require major, immediate, concrete action. And I don't have policy change anywhere in my slides. But in order for those concrete actions to be sustainable, we gotta shift our values. And this happens through relationship restoration. So I'm a dietetic intern, and during clinical rotations, patients would say, just tell me what I should and shouldn't eat. But instead of doing that, I'd say, how about we talk about your relationship with food and your body and why you're here today? Because it was those relationships that were in need of treatment and healing. If they don't get addressed, then the patient can just leave and continue in a cycle of fad dieting and disordered eating, because the root issue could only be healed through valuing their body enough to care for it. So what if we valued our own region enough to care for it? This can happen through regionalized food systems. So now, instead of seeing an avocado grown in California, consider a jar of honey from a beekeeper a county over. The steps of these processes are still completed, but they pass through far fewer hands and require less transportation and resources utilized. And this makes regionalized food systems sustainable, less likely to be affected by a pandemic, and better for our community, environment, and soil. Regionalized food systems don't operate by valuing expansion or growth, but by valuing that region. This means that biodiversity is promoted, soil health is prioritized, food security is possible, and environmental health is valued. And when these things happen, that food system can become truly sustainable and continue in practices that work towards environmental health and food security, because that's where its values are placed. And just to be clear, I'm not saying never buy your groceries from a commercialized store again. Dr. Michael Ham from MSU said, it doesn't mean we destroy global trade, but it doesn't mean that we preference it. It means that we don't preference it, in fact. These are some of the channels through which consumers can connect with farmers, which is a relationship that is naturally strengthened through regionalized food systems. We should also note that this is not a new concept at all. Regionalized food systems have been in operation by Indigenous peoples for millennia and have also been disrupted by colonialism. So, sustainable food systems require relationship and community, and this makes sense. Storytelling preserves culture and values these practices and strengthens the region as a whole. Valerie Segrist, a member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe and regional director of the Native Food and Knowledge Systems, talks about how transactional and consumer-based the system is, while picking huckleberries from the field is entirely different and relational, as it should be. When we think about it, this is how food is supposed to be, not thrown in a buggy from the shelf without a second thought of where it came from, but obtained as a form of relationship. So let's prioritize listening and learning from elders, activists, growers, and teachers. Let's communicate and collaborate with individuals who may be outside of your scope or who may have very different experiences from you. More often than not, we're wanting and working for the same thing, and strengthen and build relationships. with your community, your region, and the dirt under your feet. I'm leaving y'all with a quote from Dr. Rattan Law. He said, "We do not own the environment owns us. When we realize that, we will treat all water, air, vegetation, livestock, and wildlife with dignity and respect." So here are some super wonderful, helpful resources, websites, articles, and minds to pick. And these are also going to be sent in the notes. And that's all I got. Thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. And here are my references, because those ideas did not all come from my brain. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Leah. That was fantastic. I'm very inspired. And thrilled to introduce our third panelist, Pam Nixon. Take it away, Pam.
Hello. Living here in West Virginia, my topic is understanding the challenge of climate change in vulnerable communities. So living here in West Virginia, our rich natural resources are both a blessing and a curse. They have given rise to coal mines and natural gas and oil wells. Out of these have come coal-fired power plants and boilers, gas processing facilities, manufacturing industries that use our resources as fuel. But by helping the economy with jobs, our resources also pose health risks for the workers in nearby communities. The burning of fossil fuels emits CO2 and other greenhouse gases, as well as heavy metals, such as mercury, arsenic, and lead. Manufacturing facilities emit not only greenhouse gases, but other hazardous and toxic pollutants, leaving the public at risk of poor air quality and water quality. Potential increases in cancer, cardiovascular diseases, asthma, COPD, and other respiratory illnesses. Studies have proven that these industries and facilities are usually located near low-income communities and Black, brown, and indigenous people of color. In 2020, we were made aware of these underlying health conditions, which were amplified by the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic in these populations. The vulnerable communities are sometimes referred to as frontline communities, fence line communities, communities of concern, or environmental justice communities. In January 2021, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, reported that the world's 7 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2014, and 10 of the warmest years occurred since 2005. Most of West Virginia's industries are located in the valleys, on the flats, near waterways. During weather inversions, we know that air pollutants usually lay near the valley. Many of West Virginia's vulnerable communities are also in the valleys. This country has witnessed more frequent and intense floods, droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, and winter storms in recent years. Our coal companies used to design their settling ponds to handle stormwater runoff for 25-year floods. Then the National Weather Service began reporting 100-year floods. And now we hear about 1,000-year floods, as did happen in West Virginia in 2016. Our vulnerable communities usually live in hollows and areas that are prone to flooding. When the heavy rains come through, they're the ones who receive the worst devastation. These folks are usually underinsured or uninsured, barely living paycheck to paycheck, and have less financial ability to relocate or rebuild after a disaster. The US EPA and their fact sheet Climate Change, Health, and Environmental Justice have acknowledged that climate change threatens human health, including mental health, and they concede that climate change is an environmental justice issue. And the EPA also recognizes that these communities, the vulnerable communities, are not the leading cause of climate change, but they have risks. So how do we mitigate the effects of climate change in order to meet and beat our reduced carbon use by the year 2030 and also by the year 2050 becoming neutral? And how do we help our most vulnerable communities become more resilient? This is the challenge. And according to EPA, nationwide, the largest greenhouse gas emitters come from transportation sector, which is at 28%, followed by electricity production at 27%, industry at 22%, residential and commercial buildings at 12%, and agriculture at only 10%. 71% of energy that's wasted is in the transportation sector. 66% is in the production of electricity. 20% respectively is wasted in industry and manufacturing and in commercial and residential buildings. With advances in energy efficient automobiles and in electric vehicles, much of the waste in transportation can be resolved by putting policies in place to encourage the automotive industry to move quickly to transition their vehicles from fossil fuel usage. When it comes to manufacturing and other industries, they can invest in transitioning from fossil fuels to cleaner, renewable energies. By retrofitting older facilities with best available control technology in order to reduce hazardous and toxic emissions that contribute to the poor air quality in fence-line communities. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Energy reported that low-income households face an energy burden 3 times that of other households. In West Virginia, 40% of our workers are low income, making less than $12 an hour. And this is according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Yet 73% of us own our own homes, which is the highest in the country. Low income households can improve potential energy savings by up to 20% or more through replacement windows, insulation, energy efficient lighting, and energy efficient appliances. The only problem is low income homeowners and renters have little to no discretionary fund to work with. They will need supportive federal, state, and local regulations, policies, and programs to help subsidize and integrate energy efficiency and renewable sources so that they can reduce their energy burdens. Their vision, these communities, these vulnerable communities, their vision for climate change resilience is not just to bounce back to the old normal, but to bounce forward by eradicating these inequalities. To do this, we need cross-sector collaboration that includes community voices. We can't do it without the community voices, and they should be in leadership and at the center. Community-driven planning has the potential to address the inequities and build resilience. Those who live there have the lived experience and knowledge that public bureaucracies tasked with adaptation planning sometimes lack. In December of 2020, the Gazette reported that coal-fired power plants account for 91% of West Virginia's electricity generated in 2019, but just 23% of the nation's electricity generation. As the demand for fossil fuels become less, fossil fuel workers can transition their skills to mitigate this legacy. West Virginia has been mining fossil fuels for over 200 years. Abandonedmines.gov reports 60% of these abandoned mines are found in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. And according to West Virginia's Department of Environmental Protection, there are more than 4,600 abandoned oil and gas wells emitting greenhouse gases. So as starters, the government and the fossil fuel industry can begin by plugging oil and gas wells and by mitigating the environmental damage caused by coal mines. In 2019, according to Lazard, a financial advisory firm that publishes annual estimates of the total cost of producing electricity, prices per megawatt hour from electricity for coal-fired power plants range from as low as $60 per megawatt to as high as $143. However, from the wind sector, the power generated from wind ranges any place from $29 to $56 per megawatt hour. And the solar electricity, which is unsubsidized, levelized prices range from $40 to $46. The Charleston Gazette in December of 2020 stated that American Electric Power, the parent company of Appalachian Power and Wheeling Power, announced goals to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 80% by 2050, and to add more than 8,000 megawatts of regulated wind and solar energy by 2030. First Energy, the parent company of Mon Power and Potomac Edison, announced they will transition away from coal-fired power plants in West Virginia by 2050 to become carbon neutral. So this is doable. The government and business, but government and business must work together and must be willing to reach these goals. However, low-income households will need help to do their part. And that's the end of mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. That was wonderful. I think you really illustrated the interconnected nature of all of these challenges. And we'll go straight to our fourth panelist, Jim Probst. Welcome. And if you want to go ahead and share your slides, Jim.
Oh, great. There it is.
All right.
No, that's not what I wanted. Here we go, slideshow from beginning. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Jim Probst. I am the co-state coordinator for the organization Citizens Climate Lobby. I've been a furniture maker and furniture designer for the past 40 years. I semi-retired, I call it, 4 or 5 years ago. This is my present commute to work. It's a shop I built for my retirement, and it's where I'm speaking to you from right now. This is why I do what I do. These are my grandkids, and if it wasn't for them, I don't know if I could work this hard. A little bit about our organization. We have chapters presently in Huntington, Charleston, Morgantown, and in the Eastern Panhandle. We started the first chapter in West Virginia in Charleston in 2014. Since the pandemic, we've been operating as primarily a statewide organization. We meet via Zoom once a month. That may go back after the pandemic, but you can see from this slide, we have chapters as a national organization. We're actually a worldwide organization, but all over the United States. We work to focus entirely on solutions. We work to instill hope that we can solve the problem of climate change. We work to educate our constituents, and we also work to develop strong, respectful relationships with our elected representatives. One of the primary things we do, we're a lobby organization. In 2020, we had almost 1,200 meetings with members of Congress and their staff. We have our annual June conference, which is our big event of the year coming up this year. Once again, it's going to be virtual, but we will be lobbying members of Congress virtually this year. Shot of, I think, our last in-person June conference in 2019. There were over 900 of us that went up on Capitol Hill in one day to lobby. We met with over 520 congressional offices in one day. There are only 535 congressional offices, so we do a pretty thorough job of hitting Capitol Hill. So just to put a target on this, how long do we have to do something? According to the IPCC, we have 10 years to cut our global emissions by 50%. We have what we think is the best first step. It's not going to solve the problem, but we think it's an essential first step, which is to put a price on the carbon content of fossil fuels. Our approach is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It was recently reintroduced into Congress about 2 weeks ago. It's HR 2307, if you're interested in it. What it would do, it would put a fee starting at $15 per ton on the carbon content of all fossil fuels and refund those monies collected to American households in the form of a rebate. What this would do is it would raise prices on everything made with fossil fuels, transported with fossil fuels. Fossil fuel-based products would become more expensive. And conversely, things made with renewables would become cheaper, more competitive in the marketplace, and this would help to incentivize a transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a more renewable economy. Second part of our proposal is to put a price at the border. So if you're trying to import goods into the United States and your country is not pricing carbon, we'll charge you for it at the border. So the result of this is it's actually going to create jobs. It's going to create jobs in a clean energy economy, hopefully in communities that are suffering now. It's going to save lives. Right now, we are losing 350,000 Americans every year due to illnesses related to air quality. It's actually going to result in putting money in people's pockets. In year 10, a family of 4 would be receiving a yearly dividend of almost $3,000. So this policy is actually affordable. It's going to put money in people's pockets, and most low and middle income Americans will come out financially ahead or break even under this approach. So what does this mean for West Virginia? Number one, coal is in decline now. It has been for a number of years and is expected to continue to decline. You can tell from this chart the direction that coal is going. In 2020, coal was 15% of our electrical production in this country. So the problem for those of us in coal country is that a carbon price will have a more dramatic impact on coal than any other of the fossil fuels for the simple reason that coal emits twice as much carbon dioxide. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, while it does make up for our citizens' increased energy cost, it doesn't do anything to help workers who have lost their jobs as a result of this policy. So all that being said, there is a group of us within CCL that meet twice a month to discuss issues unique to working in coal country. In 2019, we had the opportunity to do a presentation at our national conference, and we decided our focus would be on informing other CCLers as to the issues that residents, workers, and communities were facing as a result of the decline in the coal industry, and how those issues would be amplified by CCL's legislative approach. In the process of working on this presentation, we ended up doing more than we had originally planned, as we ended up developing what became our proposal to slightly alter the carbon fee and dividend approach so that it would help to ensure a fair and just transition in the coal fields. Very briefly, carbon pricing has the potential to raise a lot of money. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act will raise approximately $3 trillion over the first 10 years. We looked at that and determined that if we carved out around 1% of that revenue, we could return $26 billion to the coal fields to aid in a just transition. That idea became a new day for the coal fields. And at this point, I'm going to play the video that we created as a result of our work.
A new day for the coal fields. Since the first coal miners in the U.S. went underground to retrieve rich deposits of coal, they have died in roof falls, explosions, and other accidents, and they have suffocated slowly from lung disease. What do we owe them? Coal powered the railroads, the steel industry, the electric grid, in short, the Industrial Revolution. But this black gold required miners and their labor to bring it above ground for human use. What do we owe them? Despite fierce and violent opposition from mine miners, coal miners led the interracial industrial
I don't know what to do.
Okay, that's okay. I have your presentation. Maybe it will play for me. And while we're trying to get that to work, let's remind people that we have Q&A questions that you can ask using the Q&A feature of Zoom. We're so close. It was such a good, we were like right in the middle of that video and it was really working.
Should I stop screen sharing?
Sure, yeah, because we're looking at your files right now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Let me try maybe. Okay, so if you can stop share, I can go ahead and share it. It's working for me.
Okay, I can't get
your slides ahead of time. We can also share a link to watch it online later in case that's easier.
Okay, there we go.
All right. Why don't we just try it? We're so close to the end here. Let's make sure we can see it.
especially from surface mining, leveled mountains, contaminated streams and water supplies, denuded hillsides, and excessive flooding. What do we owe them? Today, as we transition to renewable, cleaner sources of energy, communities once dependent on coal mining are left with crumbling public infrastructure, unemployment, poverty, and high rates of disability and disease, including the highest opioid overdose death rate in the country. What do we owe them? If there is to be a just transition from the fossil fuel economy of the past to a new economy powered by renewable energy, it should begin with the coal miners and coal communities of our nation. We owe it to them. Because we feel that miners and their communities deserve more than is currently being provided, as we transition away from the use of coal, we propose an approach that will help to ensure a just transition in the coal fields. This assistance is necessary because there are very few other jobs available in the regions where these mines exist. As these mines cease operations, there is a resulting drastic decline in revenues. Our proposal, A New Day for the Coalfields, will pay health benefits, early retirement for workers near retirement age, pension contributions so that ex-miners maintain eligibility for their miner's pension, pay supplements to make up some of the difference if they take a job that pays substantially less than their job in the mines, and support while they look for work, which might include help with searching, training, relocation expenses if needed, and pay at 3/4 of their previous salary while they look for work. Our proposal would also offer assistance to miners wanting to start new businesses in the form of advice, training, and financing, which would have the added benefit of creating new jobs in the coal fields. The communities where these operations exist are dependent upon the severance, property, and business taxes generated by these mines, and New Day would provide funding to help make up for this lost revenue. Our proposal would result in $13 billion being made available for worker transition over a 10-year period of time, and another $13 billion to aid coal communities over that same time period. Please reach out to your members of Congress and ask them to support A New Day for the Coalfields.
All right. I'm glad we got it to work there at the end. So Thank you so much to our panelists. Each of your presentations was unique and interrelated at the same time. It's just wonderful to have these big ideas on how to solve climate in West Virginia. And to our audience, as we mentioned, we are recording this presentation because we hope that it is shared widely across the state as a resource. And we especially invite students and teachers to use this dialogue to have climate conversations in their schools and communities, and especially to take the pledge to make climate a class. And I'm going to put that link in the chat for everyone. There are lots of resources for every subject area, and I'm part of a team of climate educators called the West Virginia Climate Change Professional Development Team, and we are available to help you brainstorm how to use this dialogue in your class. We also encourage you to tune in to the variety of events offered this month as part of the West Virginia Sustainability Network's Wild and Wonderful Earth series, leading up to Earth Day on April 22nd. So I'll also put that in the chat. And we just like to thank you all again for being here and open our dialogue to hear your questions and thoughts about our presentations and about how to solve climate change in West Virginia by 2030. So thank you again, and let's open to Q&A. So I know we've had a couple of questions come in and a couple of them have been answered. And why don't I invite our panelists to go ahead and turn on your videos and we can all kind of have this dialogue together. Thank you guys, yeah. I know that there were some questions that were answered. We've got one open question from Chad. I believe this is for you, Jim, so I'm gonna pose this to you. Are there any other types of taxes like a carbon tax that would be beneficial? A tax on methane or other pollutants, or is it just carbon, just so overwhelmingly that it is the only one that makes sense? Thanks. And
actually, the answer is it isn't just carbon. We include other greenhouse gases as part of our approach. Methane is included, as a matter of fact, and off the top of my head, I can't remember what all the other greenhouse gases are, but they're also included. So methane content would be taxed.
Great, thanks, Jim. And I know that we've answered a couple other questions too in the chat, some pretty big questions. Leah, did you want to explain that the detrimental agricultural practices that have a huge impact on climate change and worsen the effects of food insecurity? What incentives can the government provide to encourage small-scale farmers to overhaul their practices and methods?
Sure, I will do my best. So by incentives, I would change that more to policy and shift our focus from the small scale farmers changing their practices to make them more environmentally conscious to the large scale farming practices, because those have a greater capacity to change and they have a greater effect on the environment than small scale farmers, and they shape the food industry to be the way it is. And so I would say that we should shift our focus to that.
All right, thank you, Leah. And I know that we had some questions come in from people who registered when they registered to attend this event. And one of those I'd like to ask Pam. So Pam, we had a question come in that said, would love to learn about concrete steps we as citizens can take to work toward climate solutions in each of the featured topic areas. And I think you've done a lot of like citizen action. So I wanted you to tackle that one first.
Okay, some of the things that we can do personally, as I was saying in my presentation, is to add insulation to your homes that will cut down on the amount of energy waste of greenhouse gases. Replacement windows, energy efficient appliances and things like that. Also recycling, because recycling the energy it takes to produce the materials from raw materials is a lot less when you recycle your products. Unfortunately, as was mentioned earlier, the recycling going to China has sort of put a little dent in the things that we are allowed to recycle. We used to be able to recycle glass and a lot of that. I live in South Charleston, and there are three things that we can recycle. We can recycle the metals, which is the aluminum and the other metal cans, plastics, and paper, not cardboard, but papers, and that's it. We've got to learn how to work together, and hopefully I'd written down Jacob as a resource, because he was talking about so many of the other things that they've recycled things into: new furniture, new clothing, compost, and things like that. And what our counties need to do is collaborate now and come up with a recycling venue so that we can work together and at least preserve the landfill cells, and not, because the more of the carbon-based products that go into landfills, the more methane and things that are generated and released into the atmosphere from decomposition. So if we can recycle a lot of these things, it will help with the greenhouse gases.
Yeah, and there was also a follow-up to that question about how do we mobilize our friends and family too? Like, we can do these things, and kind of how do we influence those around us? Any thoughts on that?
Well, most people are influenced by the people that they are around. But if we teach the children about these things, a lot of times they will come home and they will question the parents as to why we aren't doing these things, and it can be moved forward. So education is one thing. Working with our family members and explaining to them what we can do to help is another thing. So we can work within our communities to get that done.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very inspired by Kathryn Hayhoe's TED Talk, climate scientist. She says the most important thing you can do to fight climate change is to talk about it. And I think that's what you're saying, is we talk to each other, and that's how we influence each other. And Leah, it almost looks like you wanted to jump in there. Did you?
Yeah, I would add to that such a great way to educate kids would be to just garden with them. And like, there's farm to school programs that are really becoming more and more popular. And not only do those, help shape their relationship with food, but they are working with the soil. And it's not just climate change or climate in general isn't just a distant idea anymore. They can see it themselves, and that it's not so much about influencing those around us, but doing it with everybody together and collaborating, like we were talking about. So
yeah, that was definitely my personal experience when I moved to West Virginia about 6 years ago. I never gardened before, but my friends and neighbors did, and I just learned so much, and it was really rewarding. Yeah, so maybe we could go back to this discussion on recycling too, because we did have a question come into from our registrants about three-stream recycling. Particularly, that person was interested on WVU's campus, and I know our panelists are not WVU employees, but yeah, Jacob, maybe you would like to tackle that of three-stream recycling instead of single-stream recycling. What do you see as the benefits of that, and kind of how to transition?
So I'm the son of a coal miner who was the son of a coal miner in the poorest county in the state. So when it comes to me choosing which one's better than the other, I'm just glad they exist. I'm glad, there's an option for triple stream or single stream. Whatever works best for that scenario, I think is whatever needs to make sense. I think the deeper question is, how can we incentivize someone to actually get to the point where they're asking, should it go with single stream or triple stream or whatever? Should it go with any sort of recycling at all? I think there's a huge swath of the population that doesn't have access to any option, regardless of whether it's triple stream or single stream. And so the ways that we can incentivize that is showing, if you have cost associated with recycling or waste, we can reduce those costs and you can save money. If you're looking for materials, a lot of artisans in the area are looking for materials. A lot of restaurants and bars in New York want the distressed look of old wood, of old metal, of old brick, and they'll pay high dollars for it when it's laying over on the side of a riverbank. So all that really needs to exist in changing something that would be harm to the environment and a detriment to our economy into something that can be beneficial to our markets and our communities is just really connecting from supply to demand. Again, Appalachia doesn't have the infrastructure to have that demand, but we do have the innovation and the creativity to capture those materials and send them to where they're wanted and needed. So I guess when it comes down to single stream or triple stream, again, that comes down to the organization itself and what its capabilities and priorities are. But I would want to encourage as much as possible that we need to start looking at just the supply streams of all these materials and not have just one, just wait till solar or wind is the one thing that replaces coal, because there's never going to be one thing that replaces coal. We don't want another mono economy. So as much as we can diversify all of those supply streams, the better it is for everyone. I know it's a cop-out answer.
That was great. And we've had a new question come in from Jay. He says, for West Virginia to be able to move forward, it needs to shift its economy away from coal with a combination of diversifying into other industries and education and job training for displaced workers and families. Where does the funding come from to do this? And I think that's a good one for Jim to take first. What do you think, Jim?
Well, I'm kind of hoping I answered part of that already. 1% of a carbon tax is my proposal. But then also there is presently legislation in Congress. There's the Reclaim Act, which is going to use $1 billion out of the Abandoned Mine Lands Fund to both reclaim abandoned mines, but then also with reclaim, there's an economic nexus that it needs to be tied to economic projects that can follow the reclamation. So that one would mean about $50 million a year to West Virginia over a 5-year period of time. So that's fairly significant. Then also Joe Biden just proposed in his American Jobs Act, $16 billion for reclamation of wells, gas wells need plugged and abandoned oil wells. And my understanding is that 10 billion of that is going to be targeted to cleaning up abandoned mines. And so that's a total right there of $11 billion for mine reclamation. And when you reclaim those mines, you create, just like Jacob was talking about with some of their projects, you create places where businesses can be developed. And Biden's plan also, I don't have the figures in front of me, also goes into reclaiming brownfield sites. And once again, that could lead to economic development. So there are some things in the works, I think, that could be a benefit to West Virginia. And once again, his jobs plan really puts a lot of emphasis on targeting communities in need, distressed communities, and ensuring that good paying jobs go to those communities. So advocating for these approaches is one thing we can all do.
I would also like to add to the Appalachian Regional Commission yearly puts out grant opportunities for organizations to use those funding opportunities to start any sort of initiative. It doesn't have to be based on a particular industry, as long as it's diversifying the economy and building out opportunities in coal impacted regions is what they're mainly focused on. So that's a massive funding opportunity from a federal branch of the government there that our organization pursues. As Jim was touching on earlier too, there's the EPA's brownfields program as well that's dedicated just towards remediating post-industrial sites, old factories, abandoned mine lands, etc. Trail systems that trains used to run on. So there's a lot of funding in place, but a lot of it is just sort of in holding, waiting for people to send in proposals. So the opportunities are there. There just need to be more people to take advantage of them, really.
Thank you, Jim and Jacob. We have another question. How do we combat this messaging that coal is coming back? How do we respond to that? I'll just open the floor. Whoever wants to jump in first on that one.
Well, this is a tough one. I mean, without getting political, but the previous president came in promising to bring coal back and it declined. And so when you've got somebody in the White House supporting coal and it still declined, I think the odds are just against it at this point. And I mean, worldwide, people are turning away from coal. It's just, it's the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels. It emits the most carbon. I just don't think there's a future for it. I'm sorry.
And I sort of have a card in my back pocket, being the son of miners. I get to sort of, walk both worlds a bit in this topic that is very politically sensitive sometimes, as Jim had mentioned. And I would just say, that regardless of your opinion on why coal is phasing out, whether it's political or economic or social, whatever it is, the fact of the matter is you can't argue with towns that are now ghost towns in West Virginia, towns that now have a massive population drop, a spike in opioid abuse and unemployment. You can't argue with the results of coal going out. And so instead of putting all of our eggs in that same basket again that has caused all of these issues, let's have some insurance, some security, some other options to build up our economy on, instead of just sort of waiting and hoping that this one mono economy will bounce back, and especially an economy that broke the backs of my family members and gave them black lung and gave them a poor quality of life. Let's advocate for something that gives them a better quality of life as well, and tie it back to the history of coal too, the exploitation of the coal miners, the mine wars on Blair Mountain. I mean, this is a long, nasty history of something that exploited the crap out of everyone here. And so if we have a choice, and we do have a choice in this moment, let's diversify our options.
Maybe that's a good pivot to Pam of how will the decline of coal impact vulnerable communities?
Well, these are the communities that people are living down in the hollows and things, and we just need to help them by retraining them. When we're retraining the coal miners to transition their skills, we also need to diversify our economy so that we can train these vulnerable communities to be able to work in other areas, such as in renewable energy, such as farming even, because many times when we had the 1,000-year flood in Elkview here in Kanawha County, the grocery store was shut down for over a year. And many people who have little income already have trouble trying to get to the grocery store to get fresh vegetables. Of course, the dollar store is open and things like that, but they have canned foods and they have frozen foods. They aren't fresh. You can buy, it's easier to buy Cheetos there than it is to buy fresh vegetables or an apple or a banana. So we need to train them to become farmers or anything that will help them in their small communities, so that they can be able to sustain themselves.
Yeah, I'm hearing this theme of like resiliency, against changes. Leah, would you like to comment on coal mining and food security and relationship from that point of view?
I think that this would require just maybe addressing identity and how we as West Virginians do connotate coal development with our state, and maybe just highlighting the fact that that is not our only identity, and kind of as Jacob mentioned, that it was exploitive and wasn't the best choice for everybody, and also that there's so many more beautiful things about our state, and that coal has not been here forever. Like, we haven't been mining coal since West Virginia has existed. So maybe just addressing those things, and also what Pam was talking about with food insecurity, and absolutely how those do contribute to health disparities too, and really everything is related to each other. So
yeah, I also think that West Virginians have an identity of resiliency. Like, we're strong, we help each other, and we can get through tough times. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think this might be a good place to wrap up. And I just want to thank our panelists so much again. I was so excited to see how this all came together, and as I was listening to you, I was like, yes, this is an amazing presentation, an amazing collection of ideas that you brought to us tonight. And as we wrap up, I do encourage all of our attendees to take that pledge to make climate a class. If you're a student, tell your teacher. If you're a teacher, reach out to us, we can help you. And if you're neither a student nor a teacher, I think our panelists have illustrated that just as a citizen, you can do a lot with your words and actions. So thank you all so much for being here. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having us. Our pleasure.
thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.